This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. I used Squarespace to build both Basics with Babish and bingingwithbabish.com. On the sites, you'll find recipes, equipment lists, other news, and updates. All beautifully designed, if I do say so myself. Get 10% off your first Squarespace order by visiting squarespace.com/babish. Alright, so the easiest way to make tteokbokki, or spicy Korean rice cakes, is to buy store-bought rice cakes. These are usually frozen and you should soak them in water for about 10 minutes before use. I can't speak Korean, but I'm guessing this little packet says do not eat. Go ahead and let those hang out, and 10 minutes later they're going to look exactly the same. In fact, I'm not really sure what this step is for, but every recipe I could find said to do it. Once we got those drained and patted dry, we're ready to start talking sauce, for the most basic version of which we're going to need at least 3 things. Some gochugaru, or Korean chili flakes, and some gochujang, a fermented chili paste, and some dashi, an anchovy-based broth that lends a whole lot of umami and a light seafood flavor. I'm adding 1 tablespoon of dashi flakes to 3 cups of water. If you can't find dashi flakes, you could just use some seafood or chicken-flavored bouillon, but for 1 pound of rice cakes, we want 3 cups of broth, a heaping 1/4 cup of gochujang, and anywhere from a half teaspoon to 2 full teaspoons of gochugaru, depending on how spicy you like things to get. Go ahead and tiny whisk those together over medium-high heat until they are homogeneous, and once the mixture comes to a bare simmer, we're going to add our rice cakes. Bring it back up to a simmer, crank the heat back down to medium-low, and maintain a simmer for anywhere from 7 to 10 minutes until the rice cakes are cooked and the sauce is thick. One of my very favorite things about tteokbokki is that the rice cakes are super chewy, so don't expect them to turn out too tender or mushy or anything. You can serve them as is or top them simply with scallions, and there you have it, a baseline bowl of tteokbokki. The rice cakes are chewy and bouncy, the sauce is spicy and maybe a little sweet if you add an optional tablespoon of sugar, and everything's just loaded with umami from the dashi broth. But what if you want to make these super legit? First, we have to tackle the question of rice cakes. If you can't find them at the store and you want to make them yourself, they're traditionally made with glutinous rice flour, but this can be very hard to find. Luckily, plain old rice flour, while not being traditional, works just fine. In a large heat-proof bowl, we are combining 345 grams of rice flour with a half teaspoon of kosher salt. Then we are adding anywhere from 200 to 300 grams of boiling water. Different rice flours absorb water differently, so it's going to vary depending on what you've got. But in this recipe I adapted from internet legend Mung Chi, you want to add just enough water to make a dough that has no dry patches when you massage it together. Once you've got a cohesive, tacky ball of dough, we're going to partially cover our bowl with microwave-safe cling film, leaving about a 1-inch vent on the side so things don't get too hot as we microwave it on high power for 2 minutes, after which time we're going to take it out, remove the plastic wrap. Be careful because it's going to be pretty hot, so we're going to use a rubber spatula to sort of mix up and fold over the dough a couple times. Nothing fancy, we just want to make sure that everything is getting heated evenly as we microwave it a second time. 2 more minutes, yet again on high power. This time the dough is going to be very hot, but we must use this opportunity while it's still malleable to both develop its starch content and shape it into our intended shapes. So we're treating our work surface with a little bit of sesame oil, turning out our dough, and commencing to pounding. That is using a heavy bottom saucepan or meat mallet to pound out the dough to about a 1/2 inch thickness. Then we're going to fold it over upon itself like a pamphlet, so sort of into thirds, and repeat the process probably for about 10 to 15 times. This is going to build up the starch content and give us that nice dense chewy texture we so desire. After 6 or so turns, you're going to find that the dough is a lot more agreeable and you'll be able to roll it out rather than pound it. Keep going until the dough is completely smooth, and then it's time to roll out and cut. First, I'm going to roll the dough out one more time into a sort of rectangle, which I'm going to roll up into a log. Kind of like a cinnamon roll made of rice flour and water. Then I'm going to divide this into 2 portions, each of which I'm going to roll out into a long, thin log. At some point it might get a little bit too long, you might want to divide it in half yet again, but ultimately we're looking for a log about a 1/4 inch wide, which we're then going to be able to subdivide into individual rice cakes. These should be somewhere between 1 to 2 inches long and can be optionally cut on the diagonal so as to make sort of rice cake parallelograms. Definitely had to Google image search what a parallelogram was because it's been a long time since high school trig. And there you have it, homemade rice cakes. Rinse and repeat with the remaining dough, and then to prevent these guys from sticking, we're going to roll them around with a little bit of sesame oil. These can then be frozen or fridged until ready to use. Then if you want to be a really super badass about this process, you could make your own dashi. First, we're going to start with 8 to 10 large dried anchovies whose heads we must remove and guts we must evacuate. Basically, right behind the head, there's this big old clump of black stuff, and you just want to kind of squeeze and shimmy that out. This is all kind of a gross, oily, and smelly process, so just grin and bear it, because your taste buds will thank you for it later. We're placing our beheaded and degutted anchovies in a large, high-walled saute pan with 1/4 ounce of dried shrimp, and then we need about 1 ounce of dried kelp or kombu broken up into pieces. These need to be removed before everything else, so make sure you leave them in large enough pieces that you can fish out. Then I've got 1 whole onion, root removed and quartered, a bunch of scallions cut into 2 or 3 inch batons, and a couple large cloves of garlic cut in half. Make sure to take any and all appropriate dramatic license with slicing and inserting your garlic. And that's really all there is to making dashi broth. Oh wait, except for one thing, maybe the most, important substance on earth, water. Sorry if you can't tell, I'm doing this voiceover late at night and I'm getting a little punchy. We're bringing this guy up to the simmer and keeping him there for 10 solid minutes before removing the sheets of kombu. Once removed, we're letting everything simmer for an additional 20 minutes, or until your neighbors complain to the cops that you're running an illegal fishery in your apartment. Go ahead and remove that from the heat, strain out the solids, and same deal as last time, 3 cups of the stuff in a large, wide saute pan, along with 1/4 cup of gochujang and, depending on your spice preference, your preferred amount of gochugaru. I'm also adding about a tablespoon of Korean soy sauce and a tablespoon of light corn syrup, but like I mentioned before, you can just use sugar. I'm also crushing in 1 or 2 large cloves of garlic, whisking until homogeneous, bringing it to a simmer, and dumping in 1 pound of our homemade rice cakes. Then while these simmer, we're going to add an optional but widely used ingredient, an assortment of fish cakes, which you can find frozen in the same place as you'd find the rice cakes. Then it's the same deal as before, simmer for anywhere from 7 to 15 minutes until the sauce is reduced and thick. Then we're finishing things off with a little drizzle of toasted sesame oil for both flavor and gloss factor, and plating up tall and proud as before, but this time with a sprinkle of toasted black and white sesame seeds. This is going to bring a lot of flavor and a little bit of crunch. Our obligatory sliced scallions, and there you have it. Some totally from scratch and much more legit tteokbokki, which has got to be one of my favorite dishes of all time. Just like before, we got chewy rice cakes and spicy savory sauce, but the flavors are deeper, and so too are my emotions for them. Last up, we're going to cover stir-fried tteokbokki. This time we're assembling the sauce off heat. 2 or 3 tablespoons gochujang, 1 teaspoon of gochugaru, 1 clove of crushed garlic, a tablespoon of Korean soy sauce. You can just use regular soy sauce if you can't find Korean soy sauce, 1/4 cup of dashi, a tablespoon of light corn syrup, and a teaspoon of toasted sesame oil. Tiny whisk this to combine, and then we're headed over to the stovetop, where we're starting by par cooking our rice cakes in boiling water rather than the sauce. We're letting those boil for about 6 minutes, preheating 2 or so tablespoons of vegetable oil in a large wok, thoroughly draining the rice cakes and dumping them in, frying for about 3 to 5 minutes on each side until you get a nice deep golden crust and a profoundly crunchy exterior. This could take a surprisingly long amount of time, but these guys don't burn easy, so just take your time, make sure that you got a nice crust, and once you do, lower the heat and add a few tablespoons of our pre-prepared sauce. There is sugar in the sauce and we don't want it to burn, so make sure that you don't heat it too much. We just want it to caramelize a little bit and cook into our rice cakes. As usual, tossing is optional, but preferred. Then you can go ahead and kill the heat, add some optional sesame seeds, and once everything's thick and sticky, plate up with an extra drizzle of sauce and an extra sprinkling of sesame seeds and scallions. And there you have it, chewy, crispy, saucy, pan-fried tteokbokki. Dear Diary, today one of my very favorite things got even better. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring today's episode. They've been a great partner in supporting the Babish culinary universe and bringing my websites to life. From websites to online stores to domains and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for you to build your online presence. They also have SEO tools so that your site is getting found and searched by more people more often. If you want to try it for yourself, you can start your free trial today by visiting squarespace.com/Babish to get 10% off your first purchase.